Hey everyone, I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold. This is our weekly lecture series. Tonight's lecture is titled Power of the Pawn. And our sponsor has a message. Sam would like to dedicate this lecture to the U.S. Air Force Academy class of 2018, Zamp. Then he has an explanation of Zamp, for those of you who are interested. Zamp is short for Louis Zamperini, a World War II veteran. He was our class mascot. So there you go. He had some games he suggested for the lecture, which we'll look at, plus some that I picked out. But I want to read you what he wrote about what he's interested in. Many players, including myself, that would be Sam, would benefit from practical advice on how to develop an instinct for good and bad pawn moves. Select and prepare pawn structures to suit the position, or when to maintain, push, capture, or even sacrifice a pawn, and how to use pawns offensively. Okay. So yeah, that's a difficult topic because there's no really fast, hard, and general rule about when you should push your pawns or whether your pawns are super important in any position. But we'll give some instructive examples showing how people, sometimes strong grandmasters, use their pawns to win the game. And Philidor famously said, "The pawn is the soul of chess." And whenever you're advancing your pawns and you're doing a good job, I call that pandemonium. Okay, this is a game played in Linares in 1993 between two pretty good players. Anatoly Karpov is white and Garry Kasparov is black. Okay, so black's better because black has a rook on the 7th and white's king is on e1. Terrible. And looks like white's never going to castle. Okay, Karpov played h4 because he wanted to get involved in the lecture too. Power of the pawns. So he's either going to play h5 or he's going to play rook h3 and have his rook defend along the third rank. Whichever makes sense. Okay, now we're going to learn the power of the pawn. Kasparov played the move c4 because c4 is explosive. c4 does two things. It allows black to get a passed pawn on the queen's side, irrespective of whether white takes or not, and also frees the c5 square. So one of the knights, probably the d7 knight, can go to c5 later, and then hopefully d3. So black has two ideas. Now, I'm a simple man, so I would take on c4, because the guy played c4. Okay, but Karpov's better than me, and he played knight c1, attacking the rook on a2. So now, even though this was 1993, I guess Karpov has an affinity for chess 960. Very suspicious. Okay, and what Karpov wants to do is he's like, I'm going to take your rook, and if you move your rook away, I'll play bishop takes c4, because then black doesn't get a passed pawn. Boy, now that I think of it, maybe I would have played knight c1. Okay. And Karpov probably missed or underestimated brilliant move from Kasparov here. Karpov attacked the rook, and Kasparov ignored it by playing c3. And after c3, white was PO'd because he was expecting r2 to d2. And that's like 2 or 3 jokes. Okay, so all you Star Wars fans are pretty happy. Okay, and the idea is black wants to play c2. So Karpov took the rook. Kasparov played c2. And if black gets to take the rook with check, the white king probably isn't going to survive in the center. He played queen d4 so he could block the d file with the queen. I guess the normal move is rook to c1, probably what I would play. And then I'm not sure what black would do, but it seems like I could take, and then play aforementioned knight c5, threatening queen d2 mate. And I don't like white's position, although what Karpov did was worse. So maybe rook c1 is the best move. Okay, so in this position, Karpov played queen d4, so his king would be safe. Takes, took with the king. I don't know which way I would take. Probably in a blitz game I take with the queen, but okay. Then knight c5, and even in the end game, black has a winning attack. And what's funny is this particular excerpt from the game, we saw c4, c3, c2, and make a queen. That's the power of the pawn, which is title of the lecture. But actually, this pawn's pretty powerful because it stops white's knights from moving anywhere, basically killing two knights. Pretty good for one pawn. Okay, Karpov traded queens. Karpov said, well, my pawn's attacked on b3. Here, Karpov made a mistake. I think he has to play king e1. And then I don't like Karpov's position, because his pieces are all terrible. But he played king c2, trying to protect his pawn. And that just loses. Kasparov played knight f2. And Karpov resigned because knight f2 has two threats. Knight takes rook, obviously. An even bigger threat is bishop f5 check, which likely leads to mate. So for example, let's move the rook to safety. Bishop f5 check. If king c1, rook d1 check, and mate with advantage. And if king b2, then I can play knight d1 check. You have two legal moves, I think. And then either legal move allows knight takes b3 mate. I don't know which is cuter, but they're both good for black because they're both mate. Very unusual mate. So after knight f2, Karpov realized he's facing mate and his rook's hanging, so he resigned. And again, the reason white's getting mated is because this pawn on b4 protects c3 and a3 squares so that the king can't escape. So this pawn was really good, and this pawn's really good too. Karpov's pawns, not so good. I have a white squared bishop, so those pawns aren't really bothering me. So, great game by Kasparov. 1993, Karpov and Kasparov were both very good. Okay, next. Let's see, let's flip the board. This is a game played in 1970 in a Blitz tournament, and I don't know if this is the game that he had in mind, the sponsor, because he gave the players in the year, but he gave a different city, and I can't find that game. But this game was played in 1970, and it meets the criteria of the lecture. So this is Bobby Fischer versus Wolfgang Uhlmann, played in a Blitz tournament in 1970. Looks like Fischer played his favorite line against the French defense, which is the variation he played against my dad, 1963. Similar position. Okay. Fischer, opponent, got his queen off of the D file, and it's a Blitz game, so maybe it's not the most accurate, but queen e7's a safe move because we don't want our queen lined up with the white rook. Fischer played d5 because he knew in 55 years I would be giving a lecture on power of the pawn, and he wanted to show the power of the pawn. Okay, takes, pawn takes, knight e5. Fischer, even though Tombstone hasn't come out yet, said, I got 2 pawns, 1 for each of you. Played c4, which is explosive. So white's pawns in the center are doing an excellent job of controlling key squares and blocking the bishop on b7. And white has the 2 bishops. Okay, bishop a6. I guess Uhlmann heard me, and he said, oh, my bishop on b7 is blocked. Let's attack the c pawn. But Fischer, again, knew about the upcoming lecture, power of the pawn, and he played queen c3, attacking everything and defending his pawn. Uhlmann defended his knight, and Fischer played d6. D6 is very tactical, and the obvious ideas are taking the queen and giving the knight the d5 square, but the main idea, which Fischer played, probably missed by Uhlmann because it's a very unusual move. After takes, the main way to find the right move for white here is to know the title of the lecture, power of the pawns. So that helps you find white's best move. Playing the sequence that Fischer played in a Blitz game, that's very impressive. Because when he played d6, I know he saw the next move. The next move is c5. And that's pandemonium. Now white's threatening to take the bishop, and white's threatening to take with discovered check and win the queen. The truth hurts. If you play knight takes c5, which is probably better than what Uhlmann played, you're not defending your bishop because your knight's pinned. So if you take and I take, you can't take my bishop. It's illegal. Although maybe that was still better than what he did, giving up a piece. Okay, he played bishop takes e2, power of the pawn, c takes, d6 check, knight c5, takes the queen, check, takes the rook, and white has a queen for a rook. And white has this pawn that's going to promote, and the bishop's hanging. Man, truth hurts. Knight d3 check looks good, but Fischer has a knight on f4, so he didn't allow that. Bishop a4 is forced, although you could resign, because that stops white from queening and saves the bishop. Fischer played king b1, because always play king b1. It's tempting to play knight d5, threatening queen c7 mate, and knight f6. But that's why Fischer played king b1, because remember that knight d3 check we talked about? Yeah, the knight's defending that. So if you play knight d5, knight d3 check wins for black. It's never too late to blunder. Because Fischer played king b1, always play king b1. Now Fischer's ready for this knight maneuver or checkmate. Uhlmann said, don't play knight d5. I'll play bishop c6. Knight d5 anyway. Takes. And Uhlmann's like, why am I playing down a queen? And the answer is fries. This is actually quite funny. White's threatening queen check to win the rook. And you might think, well, black just stops that. Yeah, how do you stop it? Truth hurts. Another threat white has is queen c6 check and then queen. So the way to stop both threats is king c7, but I have a dark squared bishop, so that just gets checkmated. Yeah, the truth hurts. So it's funny, he's down a queen for a rook, so resigning is normal, but actually he wasn't resigning before, but white has a third threat, queen takes f7. So everything's a threat. And power of the pawn, if that pawn wasn't there, Uhlmann wouldn't have resigned. It's a blitz game, but now, truth hurts. Now, for those of you who are confused, this pawn came from here. Can you believe that? You're imaginary, so you can't answer? Okay. Yeah, the pawn from c2 went all the way to e7. Amazing. Okay, so this is a game Rubinstein played against Georg Salwe in 1908. And in this position, white's up a pawn, and white has better pawn structure. Black has two isolated pawns, and white doesn't have any. So technically, white's winning. But white won much more quickly than you would expect. Black saw his queen was hanging and played queen b7. Good move. Even in 1908, they put it in h4, stopping black from doing anything. Now, black made a bad move, but I don't see any good moves. The queen and the rook are protecting this terrible pawn, and white can attack it again. I don't see anything good for black. So black decided to trade off his weak pawn, a5, and then he learned from Rubinstein the power of the pawns. He's trying to give away a pawn and give white doubled isolated pawns. And Rubinstein didn't want that. He wanted to pass b pawn, and he played rook c7 and then b5. And now the rook is very bad. If you play rook a7, I have b6. And now the pawn's coming. So a4 doesn't do anything. b6, rook a5, b7. Man, the truth hurts. In this position, black resigned. White is threatening queen takes e6. And more importantly, white's threatening rook c8 check. And then if you take my rook, I take your queen. And if white wasn't threatening either one of those things, it's still completely winning. Because this pawn, that's worth like 5 queens. It's going to promote. This queen's trapped. Terrible. So that's actually funny. Going back to the beginning, it looks like white has a big advantage and white's going to win in 20 moves, and the game just ended immediately. White played b5, b6, b7, and black resigned. That's why we've all heard of Rubinstein. I can't even pronounce black's name correctly. Man, truth hurts. Sorry about that, George. Yeah. Okay, those are 3 positions, games that the sponsor requested. And then I found 3 of my own from my own experience and from my upbringing in chess and, all that kind of stuff. Okay. So the student I had that made the most progress was Atul Yeshetty. And I taught Atul Yeshetty from between the ages of 6 and 11. Then he got better teachers than me and became much better. He was about 1,000 when I started teaching him, and I think he was about 2,100 when he got better teachers. Now, U.S. chess rating is about 25, 30, and the last time we played, he beat me. Truth hurts. I was Shetty out of luck. Okay, and when Atulia was 6 or 7, he showed me this game he played, and I said, hey, in this position, what if you sacrifice your queen? And we analyzed it, and we concluded that it was winning. Then he had the position again, and he still didn't sacrifice his queen because he forgot. Then I said, hey, we looked at this in a previous lesson. The queen sacrifice works. He goes, oh, yeah, that's right. Then I would say over the next year, he had the position 3 more times. He sacked his queen all 3 times, won every game. The games where he didn't sack his queen, he also won. So he always won. That's why he's better than me now. Okay, and this only happens at the lower levels. This won't happen in Grandmaster play because Black's not playing the opening right. Okay, and this position, a lot of weaker players play the move knight f6. That move is not played by professional players because it's bad. So nobody plays that. The last person who played that against me in a slow tournament was one of the greatest players who ever lived. God damn. Fabiano Caruana. He was 11 or 12 years old. He was trying to play the Grunfeld, but he forgot the move order. And I beat Fabiano because I was higher rated than him when he was 11 or 12. I was better than him too. When he was 15, then I was not better than him. But when he was 11 or 12, I was. Okay. And Fabiano, from the ages of 12 to 17, went from 2,200 FIDE to 2,700 FIDE. God damn. Okay, so Atulia takes, because that's how you refute it. Knight takes. E4. Black should play knight f6. But I'm just getting to the position at hand. Knight c6, a terrible move. Bishop g4 is a bad move. And in this position, white, with the power of the pawns, is strategically winning. I think if Magnus could have white in this position the rest of his career every game, he would get to 2,900. Okay, and a lot of people against Atulia, when they were little kids and typically rated under 1,100, would play knight e5 because the knight on f3 is pinned. But those people don't know the power of the pawns. And because the pawn on d5 is so strong, we can actually sacrifice our queen. And so white takes, black takes the queen, and white plays bishop b5 check. Now, if the white pawn was on d4, then black's just winning with c6. Game's over. Black's a queen up. But because of the power of the pawn, black's actually lost. When this happened in our lesson, I wasn't using a computer. I was using a chessboard. I didn't have an engine running. And I was like, let's look at this. And we looked at it, and we concluded white's winning. Then I looked at it with an engine later, and the engine said white's winning. So, okay, black has 2 moves. This move doesn't fit the purview of our lecture. Takes, and white's up a piece. And the knight's not trapped because the knight can take on f8. So whatever black does, white's going to take a bishop next move. Either this bishop or this bishop. And in this particular position, white's up a piece. So white's up a piece. Okay, so the only way to try to refute the queen sacrifice is to play c6. And now the power of the pawn. And Ippolito and I looked at this position for a few minutes because black has like 20 legal moves. And the pawn on c6 is too good. White is threatening c7 check, and white's threatening c takes b7 check, which also wins. And it doesn't matter what black does, black is lost. And you could sort of get to that other position where you played knight d7 instead. Just play knight d7 now. And again, white's up a piece. So we concluded white's winning after analyzing this. Then I went home and looked at my laptop because I don't want to tell him white's winning and the laptop's like black's winning. And I'm like, oh. Okay. But, so I checked. And white is indeed winning. So this pawn is worth as much or more than the queen that white sacrificed, because that pawn's going to do some damage very soon. And either move wins, takes or takes. And nothing you can do about it. For example, a6, I check, we trade, and then your bishop's hanging and white's up a piece. Anyway, he was able to play this 2 or 3 times with white and got this position. He won every time. I think one guy played this and 2 guys played that, and he beat them all. But yeah, that's the power of the pawn. That pawn on c6 is a monster. And there's a lot of threats, and black's pawns haven't moved yet, and they're not defending or attacking anything. So the pawns win. Okay, the one for the big center. Big center pawns are good. Okay. So now we're going to look at, since I've played 1 billion chess games, man, I've played a lot of chess games. Before the internet, I played a lot of chess games. Okay. This is the game that meets the criteria of the lecture. Okay. And this position, I'm down the exchange because always sacrifice the exchange. And I'm skewering the queen and rook. Oh, that's a drunken bishop. Man. I'm trying to figure out if I can make a joke. I guess so. If I question it, it really shouldn't make it. I was going to say that this is a drunken bishop, so look out, choir boys. But I probably shouldn't make that joke. Okay. Anyway, my opponent played the obvious move. This is a game I played with Dean Ippolito at the Spice Cup in 2010. He played b5. Now, I knew in 15 years I would be making the lecture Power of the Pawns, which means I can't play bishop b7, because then he'd take on d4 and I'm probably lost. So I sacrificed my bishop to get 1 billion passed pawns. Knight c5, confusing the audience. And I have 3 connected passed pawns in the center for the rook. It's not enough. And if 2 engines were playing, white would probably win. But 2 engines aren't playing, are they? They're 2 humans. And when you're human, it's hard to stop all these pawns. Okay, and I got my 3rd pawn. So I have 3 pawns for a rook. But, he's a human, and he has to stop my pawns. Okay, so he put his rook on the open file. That's a good move. I pushed my passed pawn. Rook b5 is a good move. It threatens 2 of my pawns. d4. Rook c1 is a good move. Queen e6. And he played rook c5, which is a good move. If I play c3, he takes with check. So I checked and traded queens. Okay. Now, if two engines were playing, white would win. Because white's winning here. And no human could ever find it. On the other hand, I showed this position to Nigel Short. And I said, white's winning here, and no human could ever find it. And then he found it. And he said, yeah, you told me it was a computer move, so I found it. The only way you can figure this out is if you've seen this already, because I've lectured on this game before. If you've never seen this game, this position is not familiar to you, it's much more likely Levy will become world champion than you'll solve this. Okay, the answer, I'm not even gonna, you can pause if you want, but, and if you, in the chat on YouTube, if you say, I solved it, then you're lying. Okay, the only winning move is Rook A1. And I'm serious. Okay, and the idea is, if D2, King F1 is winning, if E2, King F2 is winning, and if Rook to D6, then King F1 is winning. Then white wins by doing this. And here I think King F2 and King E1 both win. Now, you may be asking, why is Rook A1 the only winning move? Well, I'm threatening D2 attacking his rook, and then he moves his rook and I play E2. So I have a threat. If you play Rook B1 and you think that's the same as Rook A1, then I shock you by playing Rook B6. That's why Rook A1 is better than Rook B1. And if you take, then I got 3 pawns, 1 for each of you. There's nothing you can do. Play Rook D6, Rook D5, Rook B1, I have E2. Okay, Nigel found Rook A1 after I said no human could find it. If I just randomly said, what would you play here with white, then he would never think of it. You think of crazy moves when the guy says only a computer can find it. Also, Nigel's pretty good. Okay, my opponent didn't find Rook A1. Understandable. Played King F1. Now the game's a draw if we play perfectly. Rook B6. If he plays this rook takes. In fact, he might have done that. He played this rook takes. Let's see. Played that rook takes. Play Rook B2. And he played Rook D4. That's good. I checked. I play D2. And now he played the only losing move. And the reason he played the losing move is he calculated several moves ahead. He was in time trouble, and he missed my last move. So a draw is by moving your rook to any square on the first rank, except F1. And then I go here with the big threat. And you play King F1, and we draw. That's how the game should have ended. So the pawns are worth a rook. But he blundered and played Rook F1, and now I'm winning. And he thought he was winning because he was in time trouble, and he knew the other lines were drawn. He's like, hey, this wins. That's better than drawing. So I played the same, Rook E2, Rook E1. And he can't play King F1 now because his rook's on F1. And he thought he could bring his other rook to the first rank and he's winning. Check, Rook B8, Rook B1, and I'm winning. And what's funny is the engine says Rook E2 is a draw, that the pawns are strong enough to hold the draw against the rooks. But he analyzed D1, rook takes, and E2, And those all win for white. Takes, white wins. D1 queen, takes, and white wins. E2, rook takes, and white wins. So he thought he was winning. The one move he didn't look at was I take the B1 rook. He just forgot about it. Oops. And if that's not the power of the pawns, I don't know what is. Although the next example, which is our last one, is better. I saved the best for last. And my opponent resigned. Then he complained after the game that he was completely winning. And in fact, the only move he made that gave away the win was not playing rook a1, which nobody would play. So he shouldn't be so upset at not winning. He should be upset at losing by missing rook takes b1. But if the game ended in a draw, like it should have, he would have been unhappy that he didn't win, but the win that he missed was basically impossible. So shouldn't be so upset. Okay. And last but not least, and I knew this when I was a kid. That's when I first saw this. In the early 1800s, two of the best players in the world, this was before Morphy, were Bourdonnais and McDonnell. And they played a match, although I think they played like 1 million games over like a period of a year. I think it's considered a match, but I don't know. Anyway, this is the most famous game from the match. And if this doesn't meet the definition of the title of the lecture, then nothing does. This is the ultimate power of the pawns. Passed pawns are good when they're advanced, when they're on the 5th, 6th, 7th ring. Okay. McDonnell took the bishop, and Bourdonnais knew about the lecture upcoming in a couple hundred years. Played e4. Okay, so black's pawns look good. Queen c8. White says, I have a passed pawn too. Power of the pawns for which side? And Bourdonnais said, okay, I'll stop, your pawn. Now your pawn's not dangerous. Queen c4. White doesn't have anything, so white played queen c4. And queen e1, pretty obvious move. And white played the only move, I think, rook c1. Bourdonnais, power of the pawns, played d2. Confusing the audience. Okay, I think McDonnell made the normal move. Queen c5, threatening checkmate. Black has to do something about that. Rook g8, not aggressive, but it stops white's counterplay. Now, you can't play rook f2 because it's illegal. Queen f2 should be illegal because I take, and black mates and is up 20 pieces. Okay, and I'm threatening to take on c1. So rook d1. Black played obvious move, e3. Man, the truth hurts. Yeah, white's pawn isn't doing its job. That's doing nothing. Okay, queen c3. The idea of queen c3 is you're attacking e1 by x-ray. So an example variation is e2 takes. White's going to take this. White's obviously lost. Okay. But that doesn't show the power of the pawns. That just trades pieces off and gives black a winning endgame. We're going to use the power of the pawns here. We're going to stop all the shenanigans on e1, and we're going to play queen takes d1. White played the obvious move, rook takes d1, and all of you at home have dreamed about having black in such a position. If that's not the power of the pawns, then what is? And McDonnell resigned. That's the most famous game from the match. Black's threatening this, this, and this. You can't stop all three. You can stop two of them. Okay, this stops two of them, but it doesn't stop this one. Then you can make a rook and show off, but making a queen is good. Yeah, and after e2, it's over. It's very important for chess history that McDonnell didn't resign here, that he let his opponent play e2, because that's beautiful. I like the way white also has a pass pawn, but it's not dangerous. So the three pawns beat a queen and a rook. That's the power of the pawn. Queen f3 also stops two of the three moves, but doesn't stop that one. So either this wins, or this wins. You can stop two of them, but you can't stop all three. So white resigned. And that's the most powerful pawns I've ever seen defeating a queen and a rook. Anyway, I want to thank Sam, our sponsor. If you'd like to sponsor a lecture, contact my wife, Karen. Her information is in the video description. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment. I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold. This has been Power of the Pawn. I hope you enjoyed the lecture, and I'll see you guys next time with more lectures. Bye, everybody.